Okay, so part two, and I'm reading this from a post by Digby, Hullabaloo, and I don't necessarily agree with her viewpoints on all issues. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty much opposed to her continued support for the Obama administration as a whole. But let's just get this out there without any partisan bullshit, okay? Because this is just a speech given by Ron Paul in 2004, and this is verbatim, so you can make up your own mind about it after you read it, or after you hear it. Here is Congressman Ron Paul on the floor of the House in 2004. Mr. Speaker, I rise to explain my objection to House Resolution 676. I certainly join my colleagues in urging Americans to celebrate the progress this country has made in race relations. However, contrary to the claims of the supporters of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the sponsors of H.R. 676, the Civil Rights Act did not improve race relations or enhance freedom of any kind. Think about this for a minute. Instead, Ron Paul said, it forced integration dictated by the Civil Rights Acts in 1964, and it increased racial tensions while diminishing individual liberties. So whose individual liberties were infringed upon here? That's the question you should ask yourselves. A question that Ron Paul doesn't seem to ask. He goes on to say, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 gave the federal government unprecedented power over the hiring, employee relations, and customer service practices of every business in the country. The result was a massive violation of rights of private property and contract. The federal government has no legitimate authority to infringe on the rights of private property or to use that private property as they see fit. The rights of all private property owners, even those whose actions decent people find abhorrent, must be respected if we are to maintain a free society. I wonder how that kind of free society worked out for the black population in 1964 when they were pushing for those Civil Rights Acts. But Ron Paul says this expansion of federal power was based on an erroneous interpretation of the congressional power to regulate interstate commerce. I suppose that interstate commerce then also involves slave work. So in terms of private property, that should be protected in Ron Paul's view back in 2004. The framers of the Constitution, he says, intended the interstate commerce clause to create a free trade zone amongst the states, not to give the federal government regulatory power over every business in every state in regards to interstate commerce. You know, that's pretty much, that's like saying, okay, you can have interstate commerce, you can have slave trade, you can have all your private conglomerates in cahoots with each other, and as long as they're in power, that's basically the law, and everything else is to be disregarded, except for private property rights, including the right to own slaves, by the way. Ron Paul went on to say, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 not only violated the Constitution and reduced individual liberty, and you can guess whose individual liberty that was, I suppose, it also failed to achieve its stated goals of promoting racial harmony and a color-blind society. Well, possibly on that point, Ron Paul is correct, because it certainly has produced a backlash from backwards people who simply want to imagine that they're living back in the 18th or 19th century, where they can oppress others simply because they own something and they have this huge amount of power to where they can just dictate things to others. He also says that instead it promoted a quota system, which basically the quota system was put in place to bring up some sort of equality for people who had been discriminated against institutionally, to bring them up to some sort of equality in this country. But no, you know, Ron Paul says this was oppression. This was an oppressive tactic. So he's now, I guess, a victim of that system. It's pretty remarkable, this entire speech.